Coming to a point where this is not really, I think the vision is that sex ed doesn't have to be something separate. It can just become part of education. That's the goal. The goal is that this is seen as something as, you teach your child 2 plus 2. Is it important? It's obviously important. You're not going to teach them that one once they're 18 or 19, right? That just sounds so silly. So I think that's the kind of institutional change that we want to see.
Hi listeners, Melting Pot is privileged to be collaborating with the Zero Period for a series of conversations with their team on awareness about comprehensive sexuality education.
Hi everyone, I'm in conversation today with two very young and dynamic people who are doing something very interesting, and we're going to talk a lot about that, and that's the whole purpose of this conversation. My guests today are Priyanka Mehta and Atul Maurya. Both of them are a part of a team called the Zero Period. And the Zero Period is a nonprofit that is working towards educating teachers specifically on comprehensive sexuality education. And it's like I said, a nonprofit, and Melting Pot is really, really happy and proud to be collaborating with the Zero Period. So thank you, both of you, Priyanka and Atul, for joining me today in this conversation.
Sure, very, very, very excited to be here to talk to you.
If I could get a very quick background from both of you on yourselves and what prompted you to actually become a part of the Zero Period.
So I am 26. I was born in Delhi. I grew up in Delhi, NCR, and I went to college there. I studied psychology, and I now live in Mumbai. I've worked in policy. I've worked in education primarily. Right now, volunteer with the Zero Period, and I also work with an edtech startup. It's an admissions consulting company. As for my family, I'm the middle child of my parents, and I do like to sort of think, or most people around me think, I did grow up in a fairly progressive family, for by Indian standards, whatever that is, but fairly progressive. So my views, in the future that are going to be expressed, I think it's nice to put that in context of, my upbringing was fairly liberal, fairly progressive, I would say, for the most part.
So I'm an economics major and a master's in sports management, and currently I'm working in a startup based on opinion trading. And I'm 23 right now. I've lived in tier 3, tier 2, tier 1 cities as a whole. So I have that whole experience of like exploring India in a nutshell, like being in Mumbai, being in Delhi, being in Allahabad, and being in Uttarakhand. So I think I do cover that spectrum as a whole. I've been a science student, I've been a commerce student. So that part is also covered. But all in all, I
all
think
of
that's
this
about
at
me.
all of this at the age of 23. That's amazing. What kind of sex education were both of you given when you were at school?
So during my time, like during my childhood days, as I mentioned, at that time, I used to live in a tier 3 city. And that very environment in the school itself with my parents itself, this wasn't a common topic to talk about, neither in the school, neither with the parents. So at that time, I do not feel that I did get any sex education. For us people, if the term sex education came up, it was just the basic biology from our class 8th or 9th textbooks.
Sure. So I do want to mention that my mom's a nurse. So now this is interesting, given that I said that I grew up in a fairly progressive family and my mom's a nurse. People would expect that we talked about, we at least had somewhat of, education from the home, but that was not the case. As I've grown up, as adults, our parents have spoken about it, but it didn't come at the right time. Which is why when I think of school now that you asked us about school, I have a memory of actually having a sex ed workshop. So we were taken. I was in 8th grade. We were all taken to this auditorium. All the 8th grade. So we had 6 sections. So all of us were taken. I think 2 sections were taken together. And I remember this, I do remember this man's face. He was a really old man who was there. And we kind of had a sense what this person is there for. So we were a little excited also about missing the class, I guess. We went there and it was, I would say, about 50 minutes of a workshop. And we discussed very, I would say, high point stuff of just like menstruation. We discussed, we were given chits. We were asked, you can ask any anonymous question. And I distinctly remember everybody trying to change their handwriting because people were like, what if they find out that I wrote that question? I don't want to be the person who's asking, some question that's, even though they did tell us that these questions are, anonymous and we can, but most students were so scared that they still asked, I think, questions around menstruation or something like that. And quite unfortunate, I would say. And sometimes I reflect back and I still distinctly remember being in that auditorium. But that was the breadth of what we got. And obviously, I think that wasn't sufficient. That was nowhere close to sufficient, I would say. But yeah, our school did have at least a workshop, I would say.
So how did this lack of sex education, both at home as well as in school, actually impact your later lives?
So post class 8th, I moved out to a residential school. For the first 2 years, I was in an all boys school, a residential school. So that feeling was altogether different. Like all boys, in their budding years, like growing physically and mentally in that very headspace and not knowing anything about it. And the worst part being, like, even with women as a whole, they have that very idea that they do ask the relevant questions. With guys like us, it wasn't the case, even with the teachers. And if someone had that courage to ask a single question, like, people would make fun of them. So at that time, people would refrain to ask those questions. Like, they'll go to the teacher personally, and if they're feeling something, of if there's a bodily change or something, they'll ask the teachers, okay, this is something that's happening to me, is it natural, is it supposed to happen? At that time, the teachers were polite enough to tell us that in the very manner it is supposed to be, but it wasn't like obvious. It wasn't happening as a whole. We had to make that extra effort to gather that very knowledge. Post that, when I moved to a co-ed for my 11th and 12th, at that time also, now that I was in a boys school and now I've moved to a co-ed, in an environment where I do expect people to know some things, but now I am the shy person. I do not know about a lot of things. So now that changes as a whole. You share a same space, like with a female counterpart, with a classmate, and you do not know sometimes what's appropriate to talk about or not, right? Because we are in that very phase. So that was troublesome at times. And I feel that if I would have known better at times, because I remember one incident, and I think which is very normal for me now, but at that time, like, people used to term it as scandalous. I remember being in a computer lab sort of a thing, like we used to have labs, and one of my classmates opened her notebook, right? And there was a sanitary pad in that very thing. And for guys, it's like, at that time, was the most funny thing there is. And now that you think of it, it's problematic because we did not know what's the purpose of that very thing.
Comprehensive sex ed, I would say the ideas around bullying, empathy, menstruation, those things did impact me in a similar way. Like the first time I got my period, I was confused, but that was mostly taken care of. But the lack of sex ed, I feel, impacted me the most when I got out of school. I think my initial brush, my sexual experiences, could have been better if I had received sex ed. Now, I mentioned earlier, I do come, my parents were always the sort of people, go out and figure out for yourself. Now, this does not apply to everything. The thing is, when parents come with that outlook, they still give you the tools. For instance, they're giving you tools. This is how you have to deal with heartbreaks. This is how you have to deal if your pets die. Now, they do want you to learn things as you go along, become adults. But even with, I say, my parents were pretty open about discussing most things, I think they know how to, which is why when people question the zero period, this is something that has to come from households and this is not the teacher's responsibility. I say no. Even the most progressive parents are struggling with it. My parents now talk about it pretty openly. We talk about, my mother is actually very passionate about family planning. So we've often discussed, since I've been 19, 20, very often she'll discuss a woman's decision to sort of deciding when to have children can impact everything in our life. And I myself, I had that at the back of my mind, oh, this is something that women should be allowed to choose, right? And I'm the middle child. I have two more siblings, and it's the more the merrier. But we are open to the extent that we've discussed that my mom didn't want three children actually. So it's something that was always present, and I think the lack of sex had impacted me with my early decisions of my early sexual experiences. I think they would have been better. Now I don't know what I mean is I can tell you I may have delayed having sex, I guess. So that's a pretty straightforward statement to make. But it's hard to always counterfactually say what could have happened if you got it. But that's sort of my sense that my initial interaction with sexual experiences had a lot of anxiety. Things were just typical. I think a lot of things that people predict that do happen when you don't get appropriate sex ed.
Where are we at with the zero period, and what is because you're both in different parts of the country, so what is your contribution to what the zero period is doing?
As far as the journey of the zero period is concerned, I would say we've actually come much farther than we thought, and I keep having these conversations with Badha. Even if we just look at our sensitization program, which is just touching teachers, touching very basic topics of bullying, empathy, eating disorders, body shaming, very basic stuff, we are still having big cohorts. We've had 1,500 teachers till now. And to think about the impact is actually that just changing the outlook of these few teachers on this is going to cause a ripple effect. So for me, I'm also optimistic. So I do like to think that the impact being created is pretty massive, but that's one. Another thing about my journey is that, I started as just saying I'm a volunteer. I wasn't sure. I knew why I was starting or, where I'm coming from. I just wanted to be associated with the cause. As we went on, but then the founder and I kept having conversations about, what could be my area of impact. And right now I'm mostly doing, the partnerships and fundraising bit. But of course, I've attended all through the last 8 months. I've attended all of the sensitization, all of the ambassador programs, seen the kind of cohorts we've had, the English speaking, the Hindi speaking, the ones coming from Delhi, the ones coming from Haryana. So there's quite a lot of learning in just that 1 hour, 2 hours of sessions that we do in a day.
For me, it has been a journey because I've known both the co-founders. They were my college mates. So I know them since 2015. And I was around when the ideation took place for the very thing. I was around when it started. And for me, it has been a thought that I wanted to do something for the society. Right. And at that part, I just felt like, okay, this is like living a dream through someone else's lenses, right? Through Barkha's and Bhumika's lens, I can live my own dream and I can be a part of something and I can contribute to it. The main part was contributing to the very cause. And when the program started, okay, everyone had their jitters. Like, first of all, we were supposed to be sensitized in that very system. And post that, the teachers. First, we were sensitized in that very environment, and then the teachers. We had experiences, as Priyanka mentioned. Like, even if we had experiences with teachers in Rajasthan, in Delhi, the next time when we went to Haryana, the experiences are different altogether. So you do not know what they are going to throw at you. It's a different feeling altogether. But what I believe in is that with every session we grow, we learn. The learning curve never stops. Like, even if an educator knows something, a question might be thrown at them which will make them rethink about something. They learn something new, and that is the very idea of growing with the very community. We'll grow, we'll learn, and we'll make sure that the community learns as well. That has been the idea throughout. And there's one thing that always revolves around my head, because I have heard people say a lot of things in one regard, like, especially in India, if you think of it, like, what will the society say if we do something? Like, the very basic question, the very basic problem that we have been facing for years now. What will the society say? So first of all, I would want every person listening to this to understand the very fact that, mate, you are the one who's like part of the society. No, you are the founding member of it, or maybe the stepping stone of it. Like, it starts with you. It's going to start with you. It's going to start with your family. It's going to start with your friends. But you just need to take that very step. Like for us, the zero period, it was Barkha and Bhumika who took that step. And then we aligned with people like Priyanka. I was in the team. Meda has been there. Simran, Ayushmita. And we are adding up people to the list. But the very idea being, it's your very own society. And if you think of it, no, not in a nutshell, as a whole, like as you mentioned, a lot of non-profit organizations are there working on a different, like a lot of things. I really feel that somewhat in some manner, all these things are interconnected, because there are certain problems which are addressed by some of the people. There are certain problems which are addressed by some of the people. But if you think of it and if you do try to connect it, all these things are interconnected. So we address is at the small stepping stones, like we need to do it as a society. And again, I would like to mention that you are the stepping stone of it. So start with you, then like sensitize. That's the word I would love to use, because that's what we are doing as an organization. Sensitize people around you because they have the trust in you. And it works with trust and knowledge. So you impart knowledge with trust, and then it grows, and it's bound to grow because that's how it's supposed to be. Education, that's what it, how it is. It grows. So all in all, it starts with you, and I think that's what I would want to say. And as a whole, the organization would just want everyone to have that very headspace. Like, do not limit your headspace with whatever you're thinking about your sexuality or anything regarding sexuality education. Just think of it from a factor that there are n number of possibilities around you, with you, or people around you, and then think from that very spectrum.
Absolutely. Well said, Atul. Yep. I totally agree with you. What about you, Priyanka?
Since we were, discussing the numbers, there are 31 million nonprofits in India. It's the land of nonprofits. But interestingly, the sex ed space is so small right now that we actually know each other. We are so, it's so tiny that Barkha, we are all connected now. Just spending 7 months, you would know about 70 to 80% people working in the sex ed space. It's that small right now. And you're right, it is our hope, because to bring that institutional change, obviously we are going to need more and more hands on this. We are going to need more people to come. I would like to mention that, our job is so satisfying. And the other day, my house help was around and I was just had the video on, left my video off when the session was going on, and they were discussing menstruation. It's called Mahavari in Hindi. And she asked me, what is this? This is so exciting. What are you doing? And then I told her, and I try and reflect with the team members how sometimes we can think, oh, it's just a small number, and there's very few people we're doing this with. But it is going to be, the amount of change that you can bring. And I know it's a cliche to say, oh, you're just educating a few people, but the kind of change it can, bring about is monumental, especially in the space of sex ed. Just knowing the very basic that we give in our sensitization program will change that teacher's outlook and will ultimately end up changing thousands of people that those teachers teach, even if they don't directly talk about, let's say, very hardcore family planning, HIV, STDs, all of those things. The kind of things that comprehensive sex ed has, empathy, bullying, being able to come, Indian teachers sometimes, and our education is not based on the kind of core principles that it is in certain other countries. And so with comprehensive sex ed, what we are able to do is just teach those, 1,500 teachers, just change an outlook a little bit. And that is going to, change that's going to bring about monumental changes. Is something I'm proud of. And the fact that I get to see it is really, really gratifying.
You're part of the change. Yeah, you're part of the change, essentially. Yeah. And I mean, and the reason why, I'm so excited to be collaborating with the Zero Period and talking to all you lovely people is because my platform can also, in a very small way, help in kind of propelling things into that direction, because I have listeners all over the world, but I also have a lot of listeners in India, and viewers. So I think if Melting Pot is able to make even like a 0 0.0001% impact, I'm really going to be happy with that. So thank you so much, both of you. It's just been very informative and interesting talking to you, and both your perspectives, and how growing up was somehow different, but at the same time there was some kind of commonality between the way both of you did grow up and where you are at today. So good luck. And I'm sure, we're going to hear a lot more about the zero period. And I'm sure, in the next few years, there will be a change. Like you, Priyanka, I'm also very optimistic. So lovely talking to both of you again, Atul and Priyanka, and speak to you again soon. I'm following this story very, very closely.
Working in the treacherous and very niche space that is comprehensive sexuality education in India, the Zero Period depends upon donations and external funds by community members who believe in the mission and the vision of the organization. If you are willing and you're able to, please do donate to the crowdfunding campaign of the Zero Period by clicking on the link in the description. Thank you. For more weekly conversations, do listen to Melting Pot on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts. Follow us on YouTube and on Instagram at Podcast Melting Pot. So until the next episode, this is Payal signing off.